ethnic strife, to me, is like two men in the card aisle of the supermarket on Mother's Day getting into a fight because one of them picked a card that said "to the world's best mom," and the other guy said, "No, you don't have the world's best mom. I have the world's best mom."
That's a good analogy.
Oh, come on.
Am I more black than I am human? Growing up, I never needed my heroes to share my skin color to relate to them. Why? Because they were already like me. They were human. Yet in a world molded by Darwin's shadow, many have embraced the twisted doctrine that ethnicities signify different species, races carved into a hierarchy of worth. But the notion of race is, at its core, a dehumanizing lie, an attempt to strip certain beings made in the image of God of their dignity. Whether Nubians, Persians, Aztecs, or Jews, we're all the same race, human, endowed with souls, intellect, the gift of speech, and the divine spark of creativity. It is both true and necessary to acknowledge that some cultures are indeed superior to others. This should not be a controversial statement, but it is, for it lacks the saccharine veneer of modern respectability. Yet, many falter in discerning the difference between ethnicity and culture, mistaking skin color for the source of a society's strengths or flaws. This conflation has led to the era of attributing the superiority of a culture to the ethnicity of its people, or conversely, deeming a culture inferior based on perceived ethnic inferiority, as if ethnicity and culture were indistinguishable, fused in an unbreakable bond. To explore this subject further, I am joined by Pastor Doug Wilson, a prolific author, theologian, and pastor at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. Wilson has been a central figure in discussions about Christian culture, ethics, and biblical worldview. He is the founder of Canon Press, a publisher championing Christian thought, and a co-founder of New St. Andrew's College, an institution committed to classical Christian education. Known for his sharp wit, unwavering convictions, and an ability to dissect cultural complexities with precision, Doug Wilson has authored numerous books, including Mere Fundamentalism and Rules for Reformers. Today, he brings his wisdom to our conversation on ethnicity, multiculturalism, and the pressing need for biblical clarity in a world muddled by confusion. Doug Wilson, welcome to A Flames and Crowns.
Great to be here.
Yes.
Muddled by confusion is right.
Yes, muddled by confusion. Well, Doug, trying to make sense of that confusion. As you've come across this whole conversation around ethnicity and multiculturalism that's happening in the world at the moment, it's a hot button issue. What do you make of it? What kind of categories help you discern what's going on here?
Yeah, the first basic category is the biblical antithesis between right and wrong, between righteousness and wickedness.
Yes.
God established in Genesis the antithesis. There's going to be perpetual enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And the serpent, already by Genesis chapter 3, the serpent was already established as a deceiver, as a liar. He's good at it.
Yes.
Right. And if you're simple Simon going to the fair, he can just pull your shirt over your head and roll your socks down. He can get you all muddled up.
Right.
And when it comes to your people, the people for whom you have natural affection, your hometown, your tribe, your kinfolk, people get defensive quickly, and they can start feeling superior quickly for the wrong reasons.
Right.
They think they attribute their superiority to some false cause.
Yes.
The teaching of this book is correct because the cover is blue. And so I put all the blue books in one corner of my library.
Yes.
So I know which books to trust.
Right.
That's moronic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is the blue book telling lies, or is the blue book speaking the truth?
Right.
Is the red book telling lies? And so when I look at a brother in Christ who belongs to a different ethnic tribe than I do, when it comes to fundamental faith commitments, we both worship God through Christ.
Right.
I have that in common with him. And then I look my next door neighbor is a fellow American who's an atheist, and
right.
I can share certain things in common with my atheist American next door neighbor, like shared love for some dish that this other guy never heard of.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But that's trivial.
Yes.
Right. That's trivial. At the same time, it's not trivial that we have natural bonds of affection and are loyal to and appreciative of and grateful for our ethnic background. But there's a key difference between gratitude and pride. Right.
Right. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I believe every person in the world should be grateful to God for the gift of life and where God placed that life.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
I'm to be grateful for my mother and father.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You're to be grateful for your mother and father.
Exactly.
And we can't all have the same mother and father.
Right. Exactly.
So ethnic strife to me is like two men in the card aisle of the supermarket on Mother's Day getting into a fight because one of them picked a card that said to the world's best mom. And the other guy said, no, you don't have the world's best mom. I have the world's best mom.
That's a great analogy.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
I would say, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Doug, I wonder to what degree this is one of those wars for the dictionary type of things.
It absolutely is. Yes.
I want you to get a little bit into that. In my cold open, and I've kind of noticed how like the language that you've used around this as well, referring to ethnicity as opposed to race.
Right.
Can we kind of break down those specific words and talk about that war for the dictionary over these words?
Yes. So going back to I'm a creationist, I'm a Christian. I believe that God created the world and he created all the living creatures in the world and he created them after their kinds. Okay. And the word kind indicates a distinct category where the elephant is not related to the canary. They're different kinds. Yes. But God also created a fertile world where these animals reproduce after their kind. Okay. So one of the key definitional aspects of kind would be ability to reproduce.
Right.
Yeah. So a person from one tribe can marry a person from another tribe and be fertile. They can have kids. Right. If the people who said the black race and the white race and they're very distinct and they say the black kind and the white kind, then either an intermarriage would be impossible,
right,
or it would result in a dead end, like infertile offspring,
right,
like you do with mules.
Exactly.
Right. So you wouldn't have the ability to produce after the kind. So my conclusion, and just agreeing heartily with your opening monologue, is that there's one race. It's the human race.
That's right.
And then that race destroyed itself, sort of wrecked in the crash, in the fall. And then God, in his grace, decided to restore the human race in a new Adam. So there's a sense in which there are two races.
Yeah.
The old race broken in Adam and the new race being recreated in Christ. But all the rock for the new temple is being quarried out of the old race.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So in Christ, we have humanity 2.0, humanity restored.
Yes.
So that's the one race. Within, at the Tower of Babel, races go back to Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Ethnicities go back to Genesis 11 at the Tower of Babel.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
and that is where you have the formation of tribes, ethnicities,
Yes.
people groupings, and God did it by confusing the languages. So when the builders of Babel were separated according to language, they all grouped with the people they could understand. And then these people went off over the mountains, and these people went across the river, and these people, and then of course you would tend to marry within that grouping.
Exactly.
You'd want to marry someone who could speak your language, and so forth. And people, birds of a feather, flock together. And so what happened then was certain traits began to manifest themselves. Just so, for example, German shepherds didn't exist in the 18th century.
Right.
German shepherds were invented in the 19th century. And so now they can reproduce after their kind. Well, what happens is what we call ethnicities, which would be people who have common customs, common language, common religious practices and convictions, certain physical traits that are reinforced. It's like German shepherds and Irish setters. Right. So you can and German shepherds and Irish setters can breed, and you can have that classification called mutt.
Exactly.
No telling. Now, this is another important thing.
Right.
When we always go back to the Bible, ethnicities should be defined in terms of Genesis 11, and race should be defined in terms of Genesis 1 through 3. Right. So when we go back to Scripture and we look at what God's doing in the world, we want to take all our instructions from the Scriptures and not from some person's crusade, ideological crusade. Right. So, for example, one of the things that Tim Keller used to teach is that your church should look like heaven. And since every ethnicity, people from every tribe, tongue, language will be there before the throne, as we see in Revelation, he said your church needs to be like heaven. What he actually meant was, not knowing that he meant this, what he actually meant is your church needs to look more like Manhattan.
Where his church,
where his church was. Okay, fine. I think churches in Manhattan should look like that because that's what they look like. But in the northern end of Finland, there's absolutely no reason why that church has to look like a multicultural celebration. Japan is an ethnic state. There's no reason why a Japanese church needs to have 1/3 Hispanics in it, or 15% blacks. No, they're Japanese. That's where they are. They're not rejecting people. If someone was a diplomat or someone stationed there and they wanted to worship with a Japanese congregation, and they said, no, you cannot because you're an American, that would be a problem. But there's no imperative for them to mix it up so that they've got the right affirmative action.
Exactly.
However, the United States is a cosmopolitan place. The United States is like the Roman Empire. Okay. And when you have a bunch of different ethnicities jostling around, which you do in Manhattan and which you do in other parts of the United States, then the biblical imperative is found in the book of Acts, where and Galatians and other places. And this is why the whole issue of ethnic strife is a gospel issue. This is why. The division between Jew and Gentile was really severe. They despised one another. So when the Jews came to Pilate because they wanted Jesus to be crucified, it was the Passover, and Pilate had to come outside to talk to them because if they went inside, they'd be contaminated and couldn't observe the Passover. The Gentiles had cooties.
Yes.
And so they had this sharp division. And the whole point of the Christian gospel is to tear down the middle wall of partition between Jew and Gentile. So if you had, and we just have to think like grown-ups and not like little kids. If you had a Jewish colony, for some reason up in North Alaska, and everybody in town was a Jew, and let's say they were had become Christians and they were worshiping as Christians, but they were all ethnically Jewish. That's not a problem at all that they don't have a Gentile in there because they don't have any Gentiles. Right. But if you establish your church in a cosmopolitan area and there are plenty of Gentiles and they want to join you and you say, no, you can't because you're a Gentile. Right. Then Galatians addresses that.
Right.
That is a denial of justification by faith.
Right.
If you're saying, no, we won't share table fellowship with you because you are a Gentile. Now then you put the nickel in, sorry.
Right.
There are other aspects. Well, am I saying a Korean church in LA? It's 98% Korean. Are they sinning? There's plenty of whites. There are plenty of other. Are they sinning by having a Korean church? I would say, well, I have to answer a few questions first. What language is the sermon in?
That might explain it.
That explains it. If the sermons are in Korean, then that's simply a subcultural manifestation, right? And entirely innocent. There's no reason a Korean church can't have no reason a bunch of Koreans can't have a Korean church because they want to hear the word preached in Korean, right? But if a white person came in and they glared at him and chased him away, throwing rocks at him, then that's a problem.
Exactly.
But if they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have translation abilities. Are you looking for a Presbyterian church like ours? There's another one right around the corner." If they're hospitable and affable, and there's no problem.
Absolutely.
Right. So all we have to do is recognize that artificial barriers should not be set up in the church, nor should artificial mixers be set up where we make people mingle together despite their different customs and different languages and
Right. And yet it tends to be less about those customs and languages. It seems like a lot of the emphasis tends to be on skin color these days more than anything else.
Yes. If you have a shared culture, well, let's say an American black and an American white, if they're having trouble getting along simply because of how they look, that's like a copy of Mere Christianity with a blue cover and a copy with a red cover. Having trouble. Come on.
The substance is the same.
The substance is the same.
Right. The form might be a little different.
Correct.
Yeah. It seems like people also seem to, as I mentioned in the cold open, to have a problem differentiating ethnicity with culture.
Yes.
Why is that the case, do you think?
Yeah, it's ethnicity. Culture is one of the component parts of ethnicity.
Right.
It's one of the things that make up. So a ham and cheese omelet is made up of ham and cheese and eggs. Right. Culture is one of the things, is like the eggs. Right. And religion would be the ham, and the literature, some of the shared literary, well, that's part of the culture. But those are all things that together constitute a particular ethnicity. So if you had people with an identical culture and everything was the same, you'd have a hard time distinguishing their ethnicities.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would say culture and ethnicity are intricately woven together.
Yeah. I suppose in the current conversation, again, people tend to not be able to differentiate between those two things.
Right.
Do you think that's potentially a lack of exposure? Is it because most of those people have only spent time with one kind of ethnic group?
Yes, and that's
how do you diagnose this?
Yeah. So there's there are certain endearing mistakes we make.
Yeah.
Like if you're in an airport and you meet someone from another country who doesn't speak English, and you try to fix that by talking louder.
Yes. Or slower, or just, yeah.
The problem is I don't understand anything about it. So there are certain endearing mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think we should just budget for those. Overwhelmingly, American Christians think that Adam and Eve were white.
Yeah.
But that's because we think in the categories we know.
Yeah.
Right. But we have no, Adam and Eve could have been Chinese. They could have been look Asian to us. They could look black to us. They could look white to us. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't, there isn't the differentiation, or it could be none of the above. Right.
Yeah.
We don't know our current setup until we get to the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to develop. So there's I like to say that when does sin enter into this? So I describe some of these mistakes as endearing. They're just dumb things that people do.
Yeah.
Right. People of all ethnicities do this. And I think we should just budget for that. That's the kind of mistake that love covers a multitude of. It gets into spiritual trouble when what our culture popularly calls racism. I don't want to call racism at all because I dispute the term race. Yeah. The term race. But there is a sin that's associated with it.
Right.
And that sin that is between ethnicities. That sin is either ethnic vainglory or ethnic malice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you could have someone who vaingloriously didn't have any hatred toward this other ethnic group, but was just feeling proud and conceited.
Yeah.
And we're better than you.
Right.
We're better than you. That's vainglory. Then there is the malice, which is you're different than I am, and I'm going to scapegoat you or hate you or attack you just because you look different. And the reason those things are sinful is because of the malice part and the vainglory part.
Yeah.
The ethnic difference is just the excuse. Okay. Now here's the real trick.
Yeah.
You said in your opening monologue that certain cultures are superior to others, which I agree with wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And this trips up simple-minded people.
Yeah.
Okay. The Apostle Paul says, "What do you have that you did not receive as a gift? And if you received it as a gift, why do you boast as though you did not?"
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, if someone grows up in a culture that is superior to the culture across the tracks, and it's we do things better here, and they do things worse there.
Yeah.
Here, our home is clean. The streets are picked up. There's trash in the streets. There's rampant drug use, drunkenness, illegitimacy. This culture is superior to that.
Yes.
Okay. But why?
Yeah.
All right. So if you say it's because their skin is darker, that's why.
Yeah.
Then that's vainglory.
Yeah.
Okay. If you say if their skin is darker and they're to be despised, that's vainglory and malice.
Yeah.
Right. If you say no, it's because the missionaries with the gospel got to the country of my ancestors 5 centuries earlier than they got to their country.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because my ancestors, I'm Scottish descent, and the Scots are called the last white civilized tribe.
Right.
the last ones in. And so you say, okay, 7 centuries ago, my ancestors were painting themselves blue and running naked into battle.
Right.
They were savages.
Yeah.
Right. So if I put the culture that I inhabit today next to the culture that I'm descended from, well, this culture, this is superior to that one.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I need to say, okay, the genetic makeup, I'm descended from those folks. Their DNA, their genetic makeup, and their skin color, and all of that similar to mine, and yet they were still killing their food with rocks.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. And so I've got no basis to be on a high horse at all. Right.
Yeah.
Now, the gospel got there first. That's why.
That's exactly.
And so had the gospel gone the other way first, and this is all in God's good providence.
Right.
If the gospel had gone to Africa first and Europe last, then things would have been completely different.
Yeah. Exactly. It's interesting when you talk about ethnic vainglory. I kind of see this in many more specific ways than the average person I think would understand. Many people like to think in terms of black and white, and yet that ethnic vainglory exists even just between different tribes.
Yeah,
right. I can think of the Rwandan genocide. On the outlook, those people look a similar color, and yet in their minds, they're completely different people, and there's an ethnic vainglory at play there.
Yeah. So, in the when I was a young man, apartheid in South Africa was a big international political deal, and people thought, oh, there's blacks and there's whites down there, and the whites are oppressing the blacks. And I'd say, wait. There are 3 major black tribes and 2 major white ones.
Right. Exactly.
They're the British and the Dutch.
Right. And who also never got along.
They didn't. They had a war.
They had a war. Quite literally a war.
They had a war. And then in the United States, you have the same thing where we think of whites and Native Americans. Well, there's no such thing as a Native American. Right. There's the Cherokee and the Apache and the Iroquois, and you've got all these different tribes, some of whom got ripped off royally by the encroaching United States.
Yes.
Some of those tribes deserved everything they got, good and hard. And they were at war with each other.
Right.
And they would enslave one another, and they would So you can't just say, here, let's put all these Native Americans in one bucket because of their skin color or because of certain superficial cultural similarities that I can detect from 50 yards. Because, and then the whites who landed on the East Coast, there were the Spaniards, there were the French, there were the English, and they had wars.
Exactly.
And then the battles with the Plains Indians were fought by the same soldiers who had just subdued the South in the American War, the war between the states.
Right.
So it was, you need a scorecard to keep track of all the players.
Yeah, exactly.
If anybody who says, okay, we're going to understand those 200 years of history in terms of like a Sherman-Williams color wheel.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, okay, all the people with this skin tint, you're over here.
Yeah.
That's just a staggeringly simplistic way of understanding history.
Yeah, exactly. It really is. It's not as narrow as sometimes people make it seem.
Another, if I could throw another thing,
go ahead.
I think you mentioned earlier Thomas Sowell.
Yes.
Or maybe it was in your notes.
Yeah.
But years ago, I read a great little book by Thomas Sowell called Pink and Brown People.
Yes.
It was a great book. But one of the things he pointed out was in America, blacks who are descended from families from the West Indies, as opposed to families descended from slaves who were here for centuries.
Right.
The families from the West Indies were cream of the crop, gravitated to centers of influence and power, were very successful in business and politics and different things. And their co-blacks who were not descended from these people were struggled, had all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
But for white America overall, the average white racist, if I have to use that term, the average white racist couldn't tell the difference between,
Yeah.
if
Right.
if the reason this group was struggling was because of white hatred of blacks, then it would have applied equally to the blacks who were from the West Indies.
Right.
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 But it didn't.
Yeah.
Right. It just didn't.
Yeah.
And so I'd say, okay, why does this group thrive and succeed?
Yes.
Right. So you have a Vietnamese family, boat people family that lands in LA with a shirt on their back.
Right.
And then 30 years later, their kids graduating from Harvard. Okay.
Yeah.
They arrived here not knowing the language, not knowing the customs, not knowing anything, but they had an intact family.
Right.
They had work ethic.
Right.
They had a number of things,
Right.
which is what the blacks from the West Indies had. They had intact families.
Yeah.
They had all the unfair advantages that accrue to people who obey God's law.
Right.
If you live in accordance with God's law, even if you don't understand it, you just conform to it externally.
Exactly.
You get the external blessings.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I love that. I think Saul's done such a great job at giving a very clear history of some of that.
Yes.
And really showing how cultures that are influenced by Christianity are in fact superior, even across ethnic lines.
Right.
I want to move on here and talk a little bit about immigration.
Okay.
And in recent times, there's been a real concern with, I guess, what people would term multiculturalism, especially as it infiltrates American culture to some degree. What do you think the hang-up is there? And is there something sinister in that concern? And is there something valid with that concern as well?
So basically, over the last 4 years, the loss of control at the southern border is, so the issue is not immigration versus no immigration.
Right.
The issue is chaos and anarchy.
Right.
That's the issue.
Exactly.
So I want open borders in the sense of free and accessible immigration, understandable processes and rules and everything. But in the last 4 years, the chaos at the southern border has resulted in the importation of the equivalent of 4 Nebraskas. We've added the population equivalent of 4 states
in just 4 years.
Wow. And the sinister part of this, I think, is clearly being done to skew elections. It's another form of election interference.
Yes.
Let's bring in people who we can put on the dole, that we can start have the Democratic Party give them advantages, start catering to them, and we can recruit them. So, and then the people who are concerned about this, who oppose it, can be cast and represented as racists. Right. Again, to use that word. Now, the problem with this is, the illustration I'd like to use with this is, let's say you had a Christian family that was taking care of 3 foster kids. They had 2 kids of their own, and they were taking care of 3 foster kids. And then one day, without their permission or blessing, a short bus showed up, and they unloaded 25 more foster kids. Okay, here they are.
Right.
Here they are. The father could say, I objected, no. And they said, no, you have to take them, deliver them there at the point of a gun. Now, the father could say in his protest, I don't think I was being chintzy or hard-hearted or cruel. We took in 3 extra kids. We were ministering to them. We were ministering to our own children and to these children. And if it's myself that says it, I think we were doing a good job with them.
Right.
We were loving 5. We were loving 5 children. But with this 25 extra, we're not going to be doing a good job with anybody.
Exactly.
We're not going to be taking care of anybody.
Right.
Not only are we going to not be able to take care of anybody, but we're not going to be able to deal with the pushback and the hostility that's going to erupt between the 5 kids we had and the newcomers.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to spend all my time breaking up fistfights between the kids and squabbles and that sort of thing.
Right.
And this is where a lot of the resurgent enmity
Mhm.
of that many native whites have.
Yeah.
That the immigration battle and this presidential campaign and the resurgence of some of the dissident right
Mm.
neo-Nazi sympathies and the let's blame the Jews. A lot of that is simply your natural son upstairs getting in a fist fight with one of the dropped off foster kids.
Yeah.
In other
Yeah.
words, it's bad.
Yeah.
It is a sin, but the cause of it is not conservative politics. The cause of it is this insistence on forcing people
Exactly.
to take on more immigrants than can be assimilated without conflict.
Right. Right.
So if you drop off, thousands of Haitians in a small Ohio town,
Yeah.
you're going to have trouble.
Yes.
You're
Especially
going
with your cats, but
yes, especially if you're a cat lover, because the new folks are cat lovers in a different way.
Yeah. It's, just taking this a little further. I've also kind of seen and heard conversations from people we consider brothers in Christ, who have a real desire for America to recover its Christian heritage and establish that as the common culture. And it's on those terms that they're concerned about open borders and multiculturalism. And I suppose part of the spin on that is now what a lot of people would term Christian nationalism. It's a term that I've used and embraced. I'm willing to redeem the term. I know that you've
same way.
You've done exactly the same thing. And yet there seems to be a very ethnocentric conversation happening around the topic of Christian nationalism.
Yes.
What do you make of that? How should we be thinking about this in the right way?
Right. So I regard this, go back to an earlier point I made about the devil being a good liar and the ease with which some people slip into the mistake of thinking all the blue books are true. Okay.
Yeah.
So if, for me, I'm a baby boomer. I grew up in this country, love this country. And I believe that American is a distinct and identifiable ethne.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe that Black Americans are my are members together with me in that ethnicity.
Yeah.
So the American ethnic identity is not color coded. Okay.
Yes.
It can't be with millions of blacks and millions of Hispanics and millions of whites. It can't be color coded. Japan can be. Okay.
Yeah.
Finland can be, and Japan can be, and there's no sin in that. But cosmopolitan empires that are merchant empires, which is what America is, are going to cosmopolitan trading centers have always been ethnically diverse.
Yeah.
And if they do that for longer than 200 years, that ethnic diversity becomes its own mixture of its own type of ethnicity.
Yeah.
So if you grew up in Omaha, Nebraska in the 1920s, everybody you knew was white. If you were here in Moscow 50 years ago, there is little Norway, you know.
Yeah.
If you met a black person here 50 years ago, they would be a grad student at the U of I, probably from Nigeria, or a basketball player, who'd been recruited. But this was overwhelmingly white. But that was not because of a blacks keep out or Asians keep out. It was simply because that's the way the ball landed.
Yeah.
Right. But Brooklyn is different. Okay. New Amsterdam under the Dutch and then New York has been a cosmopolitan city from the word go. And it's been that way for centuries.
Yeah.
So that's part of the glory of the sub-ethnic type of New Yorker. Right.
Yeah.
So someone from Alabama is an American. Someone from New York is is an American.
Mm.
They're both Americans, but this flavor is very distinct from this flavor and the Midwestern. And you have things like accents and cuisine and all of that. So when someone insists that you've got to, you in Brooklyn, you've got to be all white, like Omaha.
Mm.
Or if they insist that Omaha become like Brooklyn, it's social engineering. And if you try to make it happen, all you're going to do is create frustration.
Yes.
Frustration and then anger. And what are you doing? What are you doing?
Mm.
So, and this circles back around to your question of this resurgent hostility. The people who are, I see certain ethnocentric impulses within the Christian nationalist movement that want to restrict it to whites.
Yeah.
So, now, if they were doing a Christian nationalist thing, let's protect Denmark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And their protection of Denmark is going to be a protection of white Denmark.
Mm.
Denmark has the right to be white,
right?
Just like Japan has the right to be Japanese.
Right.
America doesn't have the right to be white.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I think it has the right to be to recognize that our Christian heritage, our Christian laws, our Christian constitutional structure were things that were contributed by the whites.
Yeah. Right.
It was their laws that they were the ones who set the system up. The whites did that. And we look at the millions of blacks here. I say, well, the whites did that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So the whites did that too by means of slavery.
Yes.
And because of that, that has to be budgeted into your solution.
Right.
Right. So the American ethne has to incorporate all of that. That's different than opposing an artificial dump, which is the last 4 years has been.
Right.
So let's bring in millions of Guatemalans and Hondurans and Mexicans and so forth with an intent to do damage. I want to have an orderly process of immigration where Guatemalans and Hondurans can come here and can settle and can have kids and become Americans, but it has to be at a rate that can be assimilated. Because otherwise, if you go faster than you can assimilate, what you're doing is creating ethnic wars.
Yes,
which is what we've done
right now. Yeah.
I would say to the liberals who've pushed this, to them, congratulations, you've got what you wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I read things that Booker T. Washington or Frederick Douglass wrote, their appeal was not to return to the so-called motherland that initially sold them into slavery, by the way.
Right.
But to be treated as Americans.
Correct.
They didn't see any of those ethnic splits in what made an American an American.
Right.
Do you think that there's that there ought to be a clear distinction between what's regarded a nation and what's regarded a republic? Do you think, again, it's one of those war for the dictionary type of things, where perhaps if we used a word like republic, that would be, I got to be careful with my words here, but inclusive of of different ethnicities.
I would say inclusive in an orderly way, or inclusive in a law-abiding way.
Right, exactly.
So if inclusivity is the sole standard, then you're just going to throw everything into the pot. And you're going to be so committed to that, so committed to your melting pot thing, that you throw so many things in there and you turn the heat up so much that the pot itself begins to melt. Right. And that's what we're doing. It's not a melting pot, it's a melting pot. And so what we have to do is return to rule by law, governance by law. It's got to be orderly and deliberate and so forth. If we just mandate as sort of a moral imperative.
Mm.
You've got to do a group hug with everybody.
Yeah.
Then that's secular and humanistic.
Mm.
With you were talking about nation and republic.
Yes.
One of the if you have an ethnicity that has to make decisions together, that and this is how interesting the world is.
Yeah.
You could have an ethnic group that doesn't have any political clout, like the Serbs. Right.
Yeah.
The Serbs are in Turkey and they're in Iraq, and it's an ethnic group that they share language and religion and certain cultural things, but they don't share a political structure. Right. Now, if you have an ethnic group that has coalesced in a particular place with boundaries and they make decisions together, then that political structure is going to become one of the contributors to their ethnicity.
Right.
So my political convictions, we live in a republic and not a democracy, a republic, not a monarchy.
Yeah.
That conviction for me, which is down in my bones, is part of my ethnicity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if Americans were displaced people like the Serbs, it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just like in Rwanda, you had the Tutsis and
the Hutus. Yeah.
Many of them, they might have had many shared dishes, let's say, in their cuisine, but they still were distinct ethnicities. So you can have the overlapping Venn diagrams on ethnicities can get quite complicated.
Yeah.
So and the Jews would be probably exhibit A.
Exactly.
Different languages, different cuisines, different among themselves. Right.
Yeah.
Different religious convictions. You've got Jewish atheists and Hasidic, ultra Orthodox, and they're all Jews.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What makes
Yeah. One of the first things you said to me when I actually moved to Moscow is that some people would mistake me for an American.
Yeah.
And yeah, you've been proven right over and over again, which has been fascinating. And I suppose it's because people see a lot of similarity, culture-wise.
Yeah.
And my ethnicity fits in very well with an American ethnicity, which, I find interesting. And this is the first place I've lived where I can adequately fit both culturally and ethnically.
Yes.
Growing up, of course, in South Africa was very different. Growing up in Zambia was very different. But also, I think I've got some Dutch ancestry on my mother's side as well. So I was celebrating White Boy Summer this.
This'll throw them.
This'll throw them. Oh yeah, let's go, guys! White Boy Summer. Let's surf and do whatever white boys do.
Yeah. Rock climbing.
Exactly. But coming to that, I mean, you've spoken quite a little bit around, the whole White Boy Summer movement. Yeah. Do you think that this was some sort of overreaction to something like critical race theory, or just this wokeness that seems to be demonizing whiteness in the way it's entitled that way?
Initially, I thought it was I thought White Boy Summer was initially not an overreaction.
Right.
I thought it was a reaction to wokeness. Yes.
Yeah.
This will tick them off. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a reaction, but it was a reaction that I saw as setting. It's like when a couple of boys are wrestling in the living room, and it's mom's job to stand in the doorway and say somebody's going to get hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. It's just harmless wrestling when it begins.
Right.
But someone who's been around a while can say this is not going to. This is going to go places you didn't want it to go.
Right.
Okay. So if I don't see any harm in itself as a snapshot of some tongue-in-cheek, white boys like to wear sunglasses, white boys like to surf, white boys like barbecue and
Yeah.
baseball.
Mm.
Okay, that all by itself, if it's a static picture, it's innocent and fun. Okay, but I saw trouble coming.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a bit of vainglory in it, where just a month or two ago there was a White Boy Summer video that was released, and the video had all the things, the surfers and all the football and all. This is great. It was a well done video, but as it progressed, and then there's the shot of Hitler and the founder of the American Nazi Party and the 1936 Berlin Games.
Yeah,
I would say, okay, that video was a godsend. As far as I'm concerned, because it validated and vindicated what I was concerned about.
Exactly.
So I'm not concerned about if you can receive your heritage with gratitude and cheeky gratitude, great. And then you don't get in a fight in the greeting card aisle with someone who's doing the same thing with his ethnicity. Right. You man, I love you. Do your thing. I think that's wonderful. We're doing this. That's all good. But there was a little element of, because it was my dad taught me, never react, always act. And there was something of a reaction in White Boy Summer that indicated this thing is going to go off the rails for 2 cents.
Yeah.
And the thing that was troubling about when we got to the White Boy Summer video that was circulated, the issue was not, there's always going to be somebody who comes in to try to wreck things. But the people who were doing the innocent, playful White Boy Summer were not in a position to condemn it when it went off the rail. Yeah. They weren't well placed to say, wait, that's not what we're talking about. Get that crap out of here.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of been interesting to see unfold. I remember kind of hearing about White Boy Summer a couple years ago. Back then, it just seemed like harmless fun, but serious harmless fun at the same time. And I think over time, it's like that entire conversation has fundamentally changed. I want us to talk a little bit about DEI for a minute here, and how it has become sort of one of the principal policies for many institutions today. As Christians are seeking to be builders of culture, what does it look like, or how do you recommend people go about building distinct Christian cultures while this sort of DEI zeitgeist exists around us? What should that look like?
I would say find enclaves that are fighting that. Find enclaves that see the danger in it and are fighting it. You're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or every form of affirmative action. If you're a Christian parent, don't send your child to any college that has a diversity office.
Yes.
Look it up.
Yes.
Do they have a diversity office? Is there a diversity officer? Do they have DEI policies? If they do, your child does not belong there. Do not send your kid there. Because the whole thing is the fundamental difference between someone who thinks about equity and equality from a biblical framework and someone who thinks about it from a secular, atheistic, and egalitarian framework is that the Christian wants equality of opportunity. The egalitarian, the commie, wants equality of outcome. Okay, so if everybody's in a foot race, the conservative Christian wants everybody to start at the same time, at the same starting line, when the starting pistol goes. And then when you do that, one person comes in first, another person comes in second. one person is a better runner than the person who comes in last. Like you said, some cultures are superior.
Exactly.
This guy won the race. This guy lost the race. That's equal, but it's equality in that it's equality of opportunity. Everyone had the same shot. Everyone could have trained as hard. Everyone could have, made the sacrifices that the winner did.
Right.
So that's equality of opportunity. The egalitarian wants equality of outcome. It wants all the runners to hit the finish line at the same moment.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you've got to break some legs, and you've got to start one guy 30 yards behind.
Right.
You've got to make another guy carry a 30-pound backpack.
Suspend others from the race entirely.
You're right. You're no good. You have to jigger with everything, and at some point, in order to get that equality of outcome, you've got to start perpetrating violence.
Yeah.
You have to start killing the fast runners.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is the necessary outcome of all DEI thinking. You're not giving a helping hand to someone who needs a helping hand.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you are interfering with and persecuting people who were more industrious.
Yeah. So, Doug, you don't believe that representation matters?
No, I don't.
I love it. I love it. Just to wind up this conversation, I have a question for you about the role that Christian education, catechesis plays in helping students and helping children sort of navigate many of the narratives they're hearing around them. On one hand, they're hearing critical race theory as a fundamental way that they should view themselves.
Right.
On the other hand, you've got this very ethnocentric purism as well. How do you recommend parents, as they sort of wield that Christian education and catechesis, in helping their children understand the truth?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, God establishing the antithesis in Genesis.
Right.
And what critical theory does is it misplaces the antithesis. And what the neo-fascist, neo-Nazi people are doing is the same thing. They're misplacing the antithesis.
Right.
God places the antithesis between seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Rahab betrayed her people.
Right.
Right.
And entered the Hall of Fame because of it.
and God was justified by faith.
Yes.
Because she did so.
Right.
She joined with the seed of the woman.
Right.
And became an ancestress of the seed of the woman by her faith.
Right.
The seed of the serpent we have to grapple with the reality of antithesis. But the general move is among liberals is either to deny the antithesis altogether, which is the way of radical relativism, which is not sustainable. That can go for about 10 minutes.
Right.
So what they wind up doing is they say, okay, we have to have an antithesis between good and evil.
Right.
So we're going to misplace it. We're going to draw it this way. So in critical theory, the basic division is between the oppressor and the oppressed. That's their division. And the oppressor in charge is the evil category. And the oppressed is the victim category is those are the good guys.
Right.
In the fascist misplacing of the antithesis, the good guys are the master race or the favored tribe or and then everybody else, the non-Aryans or the non favored people, they are the wicked. But in both cases, they're putting the antithesis in the wrong place. For Christians, it's, do you love God the Father through Jesus Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit?
Right.
And I might, and this is actually another fundamental thing I'd like to at least mention is Augustine's view of the ordered affections, the ordered loves, rightly ordered loves.
Ordo amoris.
The ordo amoris. If I do, so for example, I love my country.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for it. I'm but it might be at some point in my Christian life, my duty to hide a citizen from another country who was in town smuggling Bibles.
Yeah,
right. And my loyalty to Christ means that I hide this guy from the other side of the world, from my government, from my people. Right.
Yeah.
Why? Well, that's rightly ordered love. Right. I couldn't cook a dish with this guy that I'm risking my life for.
Yeah.
We couldn't make a pancake together. Right?
Yes.
At the same time, it'd be my obligation to risk my life to prevent him from dying, just like Rahab did with the spies.
Yeah. Yes. That's because truth, Christianity,
truth trumps everything.
Trumps everything. It transcends those kinds of distinctions.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Doug, it's always a privilege getting to sit down with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it again.
Okay, let's do it again.